and welcome to another edition of our treatment of the International Sunday School lesson. Today's lesson is entitled God's Blessing, and it's taken from Genesis, the 30th chapter, verses 22 through 32 and verse 43. And today's lesson is for November the 25th, 2018, fall quarter, lesson number 13. Now, a little bit of background information. If you'll remember back over the course of the last couple of lessons, we've been talking about the life of Jacob, how that his older brother, he had usurped a lot of the blessings of his older brother, and those blessings had came to him and had put a rift between him and Esau, and so it was considered to be wise for him to leave the country and go get him a wife. He has left his family to go to his mother's people, and he has taken two wives, Rachel and Leah, and they have he has worked good 14 years for his wives. And if you'll remember back how that people they paid dowries when they got married, and so Jacob, the dowry he paid was he worked 7 years thinking that he was going to get Rachel. His father-in-law pulled a switch on him, and he ended up with Leah, and so he worked another 7 years for Rachel. So he worked a total of 14 years for his two wives. And in the course of time, his wives began to have children. Leah had 4 sons, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah. And then Rachel gave her handmaid to Jacob as a wife, her handmaid Bilhah, and so she bore Dan and Naphtali as children. And then Leah gave her maid Zilpah, and Zilpah bore Gad and Asher as children. And then Leah became fertile again, and she had Issachar, Zebulun, and also the daughter Dinah. And then Rachel gave birth to Joseph, and then little Benjamin. When he was born, his mama died in childbirth. So there's that going on within the context of this family. And Jacob had served his full 14 years, and he was beginning to feel homesick for home. And you can imagine that he probably began to think, which was rightfully so, that there was a good chance that his brother Esau had got calmed down about everything that he had pulled on him. And so he was beginning to be homesick, wanted to go back to his homeland and be around his people. And so as this is where we take up the story with our Bible reading. 30th chapter of Genesis, 22 through 24. Then God remembered Rachel, and God listened to her and opened her womb. And she conceived and bore a son and said, God has taken away my reproach. And she called his name Joseph, saying, May the Lord add to me another son. Which the Lord did. She had Benjamin. Unfortunately, she died in childbirth with Benjamin. But the Lord did grant her that request, and she did have another son, Benjamin. And as we note, in old times, women considered it was considered to be a reproach for them not to have, to be able to have children. And that's what this verse is talking about. Her sister, her handmaid, her sister's handmaid, everybody had had children up to this point, except poor Rachel. And so she was sad about this and had been pleading for her to have a child. And so Joseph is born to her. And Joseph became a huge blessing for the entire family, even though he was treated pretty badly. But that's a whole different story. But Joseph had been such a blessing to the entire family. In fact, God wrought the salvation of the entire family through Joseph because he was able to feed them, because he had went down to Egypt and suffered at the hands of his brothers and rose up and was able to feed his brothers and his father and the entire family, and they were actually saved because of Joseph's being in that position down in Egypt. But anyhow, okay, continuing on, 25 through 26, as soon as Rachel had borne Joseph, Jacob said to Laban, Send me away that I may go to my own home and country. Give me my wives and my children for whom I have served you, that I may go. For you know the service that I have given you. And it's important to note that Jacob seems to have acquired a good bit more character than it appears that he had in his younger days, and that he had been really attentive to business and taking care of Laban's business for him, and was such a good employee and had worked so hard and so diligent. But he was very homesick, and he was trying to let Laban know it's time for him to go. Okay? Now, 27 through 28, But Laban said to him, If I have found favor in your sight, I have learned by divination that the Lord has blessed me because of you. Name your wages, and I will give it. Now, this was before the law was given, and they were still, they had a lot of bad practices that they used at that time. There was still a lot of superstition in the family. And Laban had used some type of form of divination and had figured out that the reason why he was being so blessed was because that Jacob had the blessing of God placed upon him. You remember back to Abraham when Isaac gave Jacob that blessing, that part of that blessing was to bless those that bless you. And that's exactly what was going on here. And Laban had been able to discern that the reason why he was being so blessed and his household was being multiplied so much was because Jacob was there, and it was because of his blessing that was actually being passed on, And Laban was reaping benefits because of Jacob's blessing. So, because Laban understood that, he wanted to continue on in that blessing, so he was trying to negotiate what would it take for you to stay and not leave so I could continue to get these blessings. Name your wages and I will give it. So Laban wants to make a deal with his son-in-law. 29 through 30, and Jacob said to him, You yourself know how I have served you, how your livestock has fared with me. For you had little before I came, and it has increased abundantly, and the Lord has blessed you wherever I turned. But now, when shall I provide for my own household also? Now, oftentimes, we've all been in these kind of negotiations where you're working for somebody and it comes time for you to, you want a raise, they're wanting you to stay, they don't want you to go, and so you start pointing out the advantages that you have given them by your work. You wouldn't have had such and such. This store wouldn't have been near as profitable if I hadn't been here and been increased your diligence in ordering stock, or if I hadn't figured out a new way to weld those parts that saved us so much money. You would have been out that. And so by the fact that I'm here has been a benefit to you. And we've all been in those kind of negotiations, and it was completely natural and normal for Jacob to say those kind of things to his father-in-law. And he also points out, now notice that his household is also Laban's grandchildren. So he's pointing out that how shall I take care of this household, my own household, which just so happened to be Laban's grandchildren and daughters. So it is in Laban's best interest to be good to Jacob because of this household. He's putting this in the context of Laban's daughters and Laban's grandchildren, which was a very smart thing for Jacob to do. I mean, those of us that are grandchildren, we are absolutely can wrap our heads around this. Nothing will grab your heart any quicker and make you more generous than a grandchild. They can, I don't know, I don't think my granddaughter ever comes back from the store with Nana that without a toy. I mean, almost every single time that them, you know, and those babies, you ain't going to let those babies do without. And so that's how Jacob placed that. That is the natural order of things, the natural affections. Now, there have been some, because sin is so far into our society at times, that has taken away some of those natural affections from some people, and we need to be attentive to that and pray for people and encourage people and to have those natural affections, where parents and grandparents need to be attentive to their children and look out after their children. But again, that's going off in a different direction, I think. Okay. Now, continuing on, 31 through 32. And he said, "What shall I give you?" Jacob said, "You shall not give me anything. But if you will do this for me, I will again pasture your flock and keep it. Let me pass through all your flock today, removing from it every speckled and spotted sheep, and every black lamb, and the spotted and speckled among the goats, and they shall be my wages." So, Jacob puts it in a term that in the natural, and just looking at it at a distance, he was only going to be getting the rarity, the thing that is most unusual. I mean, if you look at sheep and lamb, there are not very many spotted and black sheep. They are the rarity. The sheep are usually white. You sit there and look out over any type of pictures, any type of anything, that's what you see is mostly white sheep. Okay? And the goats, the speckled goats, are a rarity also. There are less of them than they are everything else. So when Laban hears this, he thinks, "Oh my goodness, this is going to work out great for me because I'm going to end up with most of the cattle, and he's going to end up with hardly none of the cattle. So this will work out really good for me." And that's actually how Laban was approaching this. But Jacob actually was looking at this and had plans of his own, because some of Jacob's tendencies are still there. So what Jacob did is that he practiced selective breeding, and it ended up, by the end of the time period, the better cattle were his, and the weaker cattle was his father and brother-in-law's cattle. Because he took and was careful about how they bred, so the stronger ones were his, the weaker ones was his father-in-law. So this, what appeared to be this real sweet deal at the distance, worked out where it wasn't going to be that sweet. Now there are a couple of, one thing in particular I want to mention. There is a section of the scripture that talks about how that Jacob had used some of the superstitions of the day to try to help this along. That does not mean that if you strap up a bark and put them in front of your cattle, that that's how they're going to be born. In just about every agricultural society, they have these little things that people have accumulated over the years that really don't have a basis in science and really don't work. And just because it says Jacob did that does not mean the Bible is putting an endorsement on that. It's just making a statement of fact that that's what Jacob did. But he also practiced selective breeding, and also God blessed him enormously throughout that time period. It does not mean that the superstition he used actually had an effect. The Bible does not say that. All it states is that that's what Jacob did. And, like I said, people will, they'll take and put over their stable, they'll put a horseshoe on the top of the stable. There are different things where if chickens lay an egg, and in the morning it's going to be a rooster. There are all kinds of things that people get in their mind that it works that way. Just because this thing about him stripping that bark does not mean that's the way that works. All it means is that's what Jacob did. And there are a couple of places in the Bible where it talks about stuff like that, and that's it's just a description of what they did. But keep in mind, the law had not been given yet. Abraham had been called out of idolatry, and they had done the best they could. They still were in the process of coming out of darkness. And Jacob had been living with his mama's people for all of those years, and they had some bad practices that they did. So, in fact, they even had, some household idols that they had, that Jacob's wives still had access to. We find in a later couple of chapters that was the case. So they were in the process of coming out of darkness. So the fact that the Bible is described where Jacob was being superstitious and was given to superstition is just a statement of fact. It's not an endorsement of that particular superstition. So if you want a spotted dog, don't take a tree limb and shave off part of the bark, make it spotted, so you'll have your dog will have spotted pups. It don't work that way, okay? And the Bible doesn't say it works that way. All it says is that's what Jacob did. And God blessed him, but the fact that God blessed him and it worked out that way was because he was practicing selective breeding and God was blessing him. Okay. Now the 43rd verse, thus the man increased greatly and had large flocks, female servants and male servants, and camels and donkeys. Now that's talking about Jacob. God opened up and just blessed Jacob. Now that's because Jacob needed that blessing to be able to sustain this large group of people that they had. There's also, too, let me be real clear and plain about something. They are poor Christians and they are rich Christians. I'm talking about in the natural as far as money goes. There's nothing in the Bible that says that if you become a Christian that you're going to be financially wealthy. There's nothing in the Bible even remotely says that. Now, I know that there's some TV preachers and some radio preachers that'll say, seed faith in and you send me $1,000 and you'll get a debt reversal and all that other kind of stuff. That is just garbage. It doesn't work that way. God will supply your need. God will take care of you. But there's something that we all really need to understand. Is it the verse where it says God shall supply all your needs? It was written to one of the poorest churches in the entire world at the time, and the person who wrote it was actually in jail when he wrote it. So yes, God will supply our need, but what our need is, and is not necessarily a big fancy Cadillac or a Continental or anything like that. Our need is what you really need. Okay? So, anyway. Okay, concluding thoughts. Well, I pretty much have said all of the points that I think are really important from this lesson. That God will bless us, that He will take care of us, He will see us through. Our integrity is really important. And those are pretty much the things that we need to take from this lesson. And friends, good Lord willing, I'll be with you again next weekend.